Hello everyone, my name is Udit Sethi and I am a director with Digital Advisory Practice at KPMG. I anchor the innovation competency and work very closely with the startup ecosystem in India. I will be the host for this discussion today and I have with me Avinash, who leads the startup and ITES vertical at Airtel Business. Welcome Avinash.
Great to be here.
Great. So we would be talking about a very interesting topic on startups, modernizing applications for enterprise use. And before we jump right into that topic, I would want to take a minute to thank IMC for two things. The first, providing us this platform to talk about this very interesting topic. We typically hear a lot from consultants like us, advisors and analysts, but hearing from the industry is a lot lesser. And this platform gives us that chance to understand their views on this topic. And second, for giving me an easy role to just ask questions. So with that, I'll jump right into the discussion, into the fire chat. My first question, Avinash, and to give it some context and color, would be that if we see the startup ecosystem in India today, right, we have close to 40,000 startups in India, and close to 25% of them being in deep tech. And also in terms of maturity, we've seen a lot of these startup mature over the last 5 years, 7 years, and that's what is inviting a lot of interest from venture capital funds. Now, why do you think India is this attractive destination for these startups, specifically around deep tech? And what do you think is the way forward? How do you see that ecosystem evolving in months and years to come?
I think, yeah. So you're absolutely right. India has a very attractive environment for startups to, evolve. For example, it's very low cost as far as doing business is concerned, easy access to customers, to vendors. It's a very large domestic market. There are 7 million graduates which the institutes produce every year. Incidentally, 55% of the youth wants to work for startups, which is also great from this country point of view. And the most important thing, India is the second largest internet consumer market with 780 million users as such, 80% of which are mobile. So therefore, it's a very, as I said, conducive environment for startups to evolve. What can we do to basically, what are the building blocks and what's in the future? How should we enable them? Basically, 4 or 5 broad areas. One is, especially when you talk about deep startups, deep tech startups, one needs to be a little patient. When I say patient capital is the need of the hour. You need to have a longer gestation to think through ideas, evolve them, pilot them, test them, and develop, go to market. So one has to be patient from a point of view of capital. Secondly, access to market, enterprise, government, and global markets. Thirdly, one needs to evolve the talent available in the country so that, these organizations truly, evolve and flourish. And lastly, maybe mentoring and, appropriate funding available at the right time could possibly help these startups, in the future.
Absolutely, that's very well put, Avinash. And see, when we talk about funding, primarily funding typically has few channels. Either it comes from venture capitalists or angel investors, or it comes also a lot of times from industry. And we see lately a lot of industry being investing in some of these startups. Now, how do you see these startup ecosystem changing industry dynamics? And how do you think some of these industries and some of these organizations are actually looking at working with startups? What are some of the engagement models you see happening today? And how do you see them evolving in the future?
That's a good question. Actually, startups are the industry problem with deep tech is so large that the large companies or the established organizations simply cannot address all of them in a single go. It needs a far more larger, play. Let me talk about COVID. COVID totally changed the consumer in this country or anywhere in the world for that matter. More people went online. and they went even more remote into wherever they are. They are no longer in their offices, malls, stores, theaters. They basically are consuming big time online and at home by and large. The industry through this period of COVID has reinvented itself, reimagined its business model, and the industry I see is far more open to collaboration with the startup ecosystem for change, for driving change. This brings deep startups, as I said, into center focus. When I say deep startups, by the way, for people who might not be aware, deep startups are basically organizations which are into AI, AR, MR, ML, blockchain,
And
5G,
emerging
IoT.
technologies primarily, most of these emerging technologies, whether that is
Most of the
AI,
emerging
ML,
technologies is what
augmented virtual reality, mixed reality,
Yes,
5G,
yes.
some of these emerging
So
technologies.
yeah, what I was saying is deep tech startups are essentially influencing the way fintech behaves, health tech behaves, ad tech, logistics, especially retail. For
Mhm.
telecom, a couple of things that we do with startups, or generally the organizations do with startups, is that for telecom companies, startups are helping us improve our acquisition quality, improve customer experience, improve our products and our processes. That's a little bit as to how the industry is being influenced by the startup ecosystem.
Okay. A very interesting topic you brought up to say that people have become more remote and are collaborating more. Now, very quickly, something which we've heard from a lot of our clients is that primarily due to this remote working, while we see increased collaboration and we're seeing a lot of increased productivity, but somewhere how to ensure that we come together to create that innovation which we see. So if I take a cue from that, what do you think we should do for us to ensure that some of these startups become more R&D focused, right? And the ecosystem is driven to create more innovation in the country. If you can
I
share
think
some views around it.
that's another great question. I'll share some statistics with you. India spends 0.6% of GDP on R&D, as compared to countries like South Korea, Israel, or Japan, which is in the order of 3 to 4%. Startups are essentially turning out to be outsourced R&D arms for the enterprises. Enterprises are happy to give away problems to specific startups, evolve solutions, and eventually onboard them into their operations or organization the way they really want to. I believe that to foster R&D, uh, each enterprise should have a strategy as to how do we play with this ecosystem and leverage the talent pool. The government also is doing a lot in R&D, right? They can do more, of course. They do currently like hackathons. The policy environment is continuously changing, becoming more conducive. Labs are being set up, trials are being set up, which is great. And lastly, I think to drive R&D in this country, the academia will play a crucial role, because while the industry, the enterprises derive solutions for near-term commercial value, the academia basically develops knowledge through research and imparts it to through education programs, through students. And the collaboration between academia and the industry and the government basically can really improve R&D as such in this country.
Okay. I'll definitely hold that point on academia for now, and I'll come back to that later. But going to the first part of the answer, primarily when you're talking about the ecosystem and ecosystem being ripe. Now, if I take that to my next question to say that how do you think is the ecosystem right now mature enough to support the adoption of some of these deep tech technologies you're talking about, some of these emerging technologies, right? And how do you think with the advent of 5G around the corner, how do you think that ecosystem would change?
Well, that's another important question. See, how do I put it across? 5G is a high-speed runway which will bring all these innovations, use cases, applications to life, as far as all of us are concerned, right? It's sort of the, blue whale of innovation, which will carry everybody together into the future. Now, how will 5G, what role will the startups play in 5G? Let me give you an example of what video applications did to 4G. Video applications truly brought out the value in 4G, made it much more prevalent, relevant, as such. You no longer hear about 3G anywhere because 4G drives video. Similarly, startups will drive innovation, new applications, new use cases, which are very unique, customized, which will drive the adoption of 5G, making it far more meaningful as far as the country is concerned. One more point I want to add is that I see that as 5G evolves, there are 3 or 4 more areas that you will see emergence of a very different kind of startup, a new kind of startup, and plenty of them. For example, the 5G ecosystem is not just about connectivity. It's not about telcos. It's about solutions. It's about integration. It's about creating customizations, interoperability, creating platforms. Each of these will, find startups, in a very specialized manner coming and contributing. Secondly, is the 5G IoT devices, right? You require sensors, holograms, drones, robotics. You need specialized cameras for video analytics. One will see manufacturing in this country improve and startups will play a pivotal role. Third point is that while 5G consumption will start with enterprises, it eventually move towards MSME and consumer. As it moves towards MSMEs, our Indian startups, given their agility and the power to think their workways, will come out with breakthrough use cases for MSME at even higher breakthrough price points, right? This is how I feel that 5G will spur the adoption, in the industry of technology, and backed up by the startup ecosystem contributing to that.
And Avinash, that's a very interesting view. And this question has been there prevalent for a while. And whenever we talk to customers, a lot of our customers ask us that whether 5G is a B2B or a B2C phenomena. Where will you see more traction coming in? And another question to add to that is, do you think India is geared up to take advantage of this 5G proliferation?
That's another good question. 5G very clearly will start with enterprises to begin with and gradually go to consumer. There are reasons for it. Uh, uh, the device ecosystem as far as handsets for consumer needs to still evolve. Prices need to come down. As far as 5G, the India setup is concerned, how geared is the country? I think there's a lot happened in the last year or so. There is a flourish of activities. Enterprise and telcos have come together, and working with startups through incubations, through accelerators to develop, 5G capabilities. Look at what Airtel has done in the last 12 months' time, for example. Airtel has launched real life 5G in a real life environment in Hyderabad with some of these organizations. And we are driving use cases for enterprise, as such. We are incidentally partnering with Ericsson, TCS, Intel, Capgemini, and startups to bring these use cases to life. Some of the use cases that we spoke last week, I was on a call with our customer advisory board. We talked about 5G and said, what is the possible initial use cases that you would like to look at? We saw immense amount of interest come out in remote factory management, warehouse automation, location-based inventory tracking, telemedicine, and so on and so forth. I see the momentum really increasing in the coming days.
I completely agree. And we also believe that 5G will primarily lead to democratization of some of these technologies, where IoT would come handy when we are talking about a connected ecosystem. From there, data moving to cloud, getting analyzed, and on top of that, AI would be managing that. And all of this enabled by 5G, the connectivity layer, to ensure that we see a far better, smarter world in front of our eyes. So now, Avinash, now going back to where we were a question before, to say, while we're looking at this ecosystem and we are looking at engagement with startups, like you just mentioned, what are the different models in which you believe this engagement is happening? How is Airtel engaging with some of these startups and some of your industry veterans and some of your own industry competitors? How do you see them engaging with startups? What are some of these models? And do you see these evolving in the future, or more or less they will remain consistent?
Yeah, there are very set patterns to engage with startups. One is direct sourcing or direct engagement. It's a pretty flat model wherein you engage with a few startups to solve specific business unit specific, problems. The second is open innovation, right? Crowdsourcing, for example, hackathons, ideation boot camps, which throw problems out in the open and you get some very interesting, surprising solutions out. The oldest way that you know the enterprises engage with startups are through incubator models, the corporate incubator models, wherein an incubator is set into place to specifically identify promising startups which can be later on onboarded into operations of the company. There is obviously corporate venture funding is a good way to involve yourself with startup, wherein you buy out a certain amount of equity and work with the startups. And of course, lastly is mergers and acquisitions. Mergers basically is all about owning the IP, owning the resources, and onboarding them. This is pretty much a set model, and we see in the future these will continue to evolve. Some of the things that Airtel is doing around startups, especially deep tech startups, is we have improved our. So we work with a startup called VoiceZen.
Okay.
VoiceZen basically provides a solution for agents in contact centers who face customers for their improvement. Using their technology, we have brought down agent fault rate by 60%, and we have onboarded the technology completely. This is one example. We also have several others wherein organizations like WiMAX are helping us improve our AdTech product platform, and that has been taken to market. The industry at large is similarly engaging with startups of similar nature.
Okay. And when we talk about startups, one of the key ingredients to any successful startup is the skills they invest in. Now, do you think India has those skills when I talk about expertise to become the next R&D powerhouse? We hear a lot about expertise in US, primarily driven by big three, the Googles, Microsofts, Oracles, SAPs of the world being in US and Europe. And that's where a lot of deep tech expertise lies, and China heavily investing from a government funding perspective. But if I come back to India, how do we see that landscape evolving from a skill perspective?
Okay, that's a funny question because the way I see it, that Indian brains drive global innovation. You mentioned Google, Microsoft. Indian brains run these countries, these companies. India, I handle the IT/ITES vertical. There are about 45 lakh engineers working in the high-tech software industry today, right? And they're transforming the entire world from a technology point of view. I think we need to create a platform wherein these Indian brains work in India to create Indian IPR, right? As against giving it away to some organization outside the country. Some of the things which can be done to improve the designing ability. I think few things. Firstly, the R&D in deep tech needs to really improve, and I spoke about that earlier. Secondly, I think the government is taking multiple initiatives with academia, with the industry, to drive young workforce to come up and participate in these roles. There are a country size of 1.35 billion will require 1 million new engineers in the next 5 years' time, right? To become a design powerhouse, we see that there are some gaps as far as skills are concerned. The existing talent, it's important that you upskill them to remain relevant to these technologies. I really am a passionate believer in the government initiatives like Startup India, Skill India, Make in India, which are fostering this. And lastly, what is red hot is that there are 2,500 deep tech startups in this country, growing at the rate of 4x every 3 years, attracting significant funding, as such. This ecosystem is ripe to turn India into a design powerhouse of the future, is what I believe.
So, Avinash, we spoke a lot about startups and we spoke a lot about industry collaboration with startups. You lead the startup vertical at Airtel Business. Would it be possible for you to walk us through some of the use cases you're working on, the way you are engaging with startups for anything which you can share in a public domain?
Yeah. I can. Let me see. I can share something which I'm personally deeply involved in. We have co-opted some startups to develop a cloud communication platform. We call it Airtel IQ. Tremendously
Mhm.
successful. We launched it a few months ago. We already have almost 100 clients onboarded. What the platform does is it helps enterprises engage with their consumers through voice, through video, WhatsApp, bots. We are building, in fact, a full-fledged call center automation, uh, speech analytics using AI, so that you get to know exactly what's happening on a real-time basis as far as interaction of your agents with your customers are concerned, right? The second one is work from anywhere. I also lead the ITITS vertical.
Okay.
Work from anywhere has been, developed in research with specific startups who are into IoT and AI. And
Okay.
what this solution basically does is that it will help these 45 lakh engineers who work remotely, as such. It will help them through an algorithm which is AI based, enhance connectivity experience at home, accelerate the application experience, for these, workers from home, and through IoT technologies, one can remotely manage the entire, setup for the home as such. These are two areas which Airtel is working with. We are seeing some tremendous response from the industry as far as both these areas are concerned.
Perfect. And Avinash, if I can take a last question coming back to academia, and how do you see the role of academia very quickly in two lines in developing and maturing this ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think academia is doing a lot and can do better, of course. See, look at what enterprises do. Enterprises, as I said earlier, they work on solutions which create commercial value, largely in the near term, right? That's how all of us are driven. But academia plays a very different role out here. Academia basically, through research, through platforms that they create within the colleges, create new knowledge, right? And they, of course, disperse it to students in various shapes and forms, right? Academia and industry collaborating together can create breakthrough ideas in terms of technology, in terms of use case, and most importantly, entrepreneurship, right? I already see that the IITs, premier institutes like IITs, are creating world-class research parks in the country. Some of them are funded by the industry as such. Um, there are, of course, 90 institutes which run an active incubation center. Much more can be done in terms of, improving the policy to promote this, industry, academia, startup, and government interaction. Government schemes like Make in India, Startup India, Skill India can be further driven, further accelerated. uh, the role of the incubator will play a pivotal role in terms of how the academia really produces productive, resources which are ready to hit the industry, and of course, improve the general, skill set in the company to live up to the demand of what is coming in the future.
And absolutely, Avinash, we're towards the end of time, and thank you so much for these thoughts. Some of these would stay with me, and I'm sure a lot of them is what everybody listening to you would want to ponder upon. Just to summarize the discussion, I think there are some very good 3, 4 takeaways. The first, primarily, being that digital economy is here to stay, right, and which will be accelerated by 5G adoption. And if you talk about the ecosystem is ripe right now in terms of deep tech startups. We're saying that they would play a pivotal role. And when we're talking about skills, academia and industry would work together to bridge some of this gap in terms of reskilling and upskilling to make all of this better for the country. And when I'm talking primarily about this ecosystem growing to the next level and India jumping some of these startup rankings, then we are talking about the role of academia, enterprises, government, and industry, primarily along with the startup ecosystem working together to ensure that there is a conducive environment, creating a win-win situation and growth for everyone in the ecosystem. Now, with that, Avinash, I would want to thank you so much for your time. It has been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you, and thank you, IMC.
Thank you so much.